Here's the funny thing. As they were burned as soon as the bishop could confiscate them. This is evangelism. Now hear this. Copies trickled up and through and ended up in the bedroom of Henry VIII. The king and the bishop resisted the distribution, but more fascinated with the public, they wanted more. The church declared and torched hundreds of New Testaments, confiscated by the clergy. In fact, the number one people buying the Bibles were the king's men to burn them. In return, Tyndale charged a premium price to them, in turn to turn around and put all the money back into printing more Bibles. Having God's word available to the public in a language that was common to man, to the English, it would have meant disaster to the church. No longer would they control the scriptures. If people were able to read the Bible in their own tongue, the church's income and power would crumble. Today, there are only 2 known copies of Tyndale's 1526 edition. Any copies prior to 1570 are considered extremely valuable. Man, this is hard to read. Tyndale's flight was an inspiration to freedom-loving Englishmen who drew the courage from the 11 years he was hunted. Books and Bibles flowed into England in bales of cotton and sacks of flour. Tyndale was caught, betrayed by the Englishman that he had befriended, who he thought was a believer. Tyndale was incarcerated for 500 days before he was strangled and then burned at the stake. His last words, "O Lord, open the King of England's eyes." This prayer would be answered just 3 years later when King Henry VIII finally allowed and even funded the printing of the English Bible known as the Great Bible. Move on. This is where the rubber starts hitting the road. What can we learn from this? You as a believer, no matter how small you think you are, have power to influence, power to make a difference. You got to see this, folks. You got to see that here are these great men who were moved to wear down the establishment to get the job done. Ladies, we saw this in the book of Romans on our first study. How did that letter to the Roman congregation get to Rome? Phoebe. A woman took it there. The Roman church, during Paul's time, was funded by women. You play a part in this too. Anyway, we have these group of gentlemen, mine's Coverdale and John Rogers, remained loyal disciples the last 6 years of Tyndale's life. They carried the English Bible project forward, even accelerated it. Coverdale finished the translation of the Old Testament and in 1535 printed the first Bible in the English language for the Old Testament, making Luther's German text and Latin as sources. John Rogers went on to print the second complete English Bible in 1537. However, it was the first English Bible translated from the original biblical languages in Greek and Hebrew. Let's go on to Thomas Cranmer. Thomas Cranmer, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury, hired Miles Coverdale and bequested to Henry VIII to publish the Great Bible. It became the first English Bible authorized for public use. It was distributed to every church, chained to the pulpit. Even the reader was provided so that the illiterate could hear the Word of God in plain English. It would seem that William Tyndale's last wish had been granted just 3 years after his martyrdom. Then he got messy. Let's move on. There's this lady. She's referred to as Bloody Mary. She took the reign after King Henry VIII. Her tyrannical stretch of time gave birth to modern missions. She's so outlawed in history. And this is one of the things that we as Americans are losing sight of the fact. Do you understand every place in the world where there is persecution, open persecution to the gospel, Christianity is exploding. This woman put the death edict out to anybody. So much so that people had to leave the country. What happened was John Fox, Calvin, and John Knox got together and did the Geneva Bible in Switzerland because they all fled England because of fear of her. The Geneva Bible is what you would call the Pilgrim Bible. That is what came forth to America. By the way, the King James Bible that we treasure 400 years after was never the Protestant Bible. The Geneva Bible was the Protestant Bible. It came out of the protest of Calvin. We need to see the fact that, go on to the next slide or two, this Bible was the Bible that came to America. By the way, it's still in print. You can still buy it. Move on. Here's the two guys responsible for contributing. John Fox went on to write Fox's Book of Martyrs. If you want to understand what the price of the gospel was, buy his book. It's in paperback. You can get it for less than $4. It's a nightmare of what people have gone through. John Knox ended up preaching in Scotland. And just to show you what people think of preachers after they're gone, the graveyard that he was buried in is now a parking lot outside the church because they needed more room to park cars. But they have a little X on the parking lot tarmac where his grave is. Wow. Continue, please. And then we have John Calvin, who we all know about. Continue, please. Let's go on. There are entry points, and this is where we get to the American issue. New England, Pilgrims. John Williams, Rhode Island. Philadelphia. Charleston, South Carolina. All places where the gospel came ashore. It did not come ashore in Maryland, even though Maryland is old. It came ashore as Catholic in Maryland. You need to hear that.
Mary Land.
Mary Land. You know, the chick, the Bloody Mary lady? Mary Land? Okay, thank you. You didn't get it, Gordon. Anyway, so we come to the Pilgrims. They were so stoked. It was like they threw this party. You know, we think about they were trying to flee the religious persecution. They were, but they were so, here's this, they were so stoked about the fact that we did it. We're in England. We got the Word of God in English. Let's now take it elsewhere. We lose that. You think they just ran because they weren't allowed to, yeah, they weren't allowed to do a whole lot of things. But let me tell you, King James and the boys, they were like, dude, see ya. Here's Cat Bear. Go away. But they brought the Word of God to America.